This is tape number 2 of a tape recording made the night of May 22nd, 1970. This tape recording to be buried in the time capsule in connection with the courthouse dedication tomorrow and as the final act of the Franklin sesquicentennial that took place the earlier part of this month. Our guest that we've been talking to at the end of our last tape is Franklin Mayor J.M. Fernandez, who is also a medical doctor, and would like to ask Doc, in his role as doctor and surgeon and physician, to sort of talk about some of the milestones in recent years in medicine.
What do you mean, in medicine in general? Or
in general.
Franklin? I don't think Franklin has accomplished something.
No, I don't know of any great discoveries. But
We haven't transplanted any hearts lately. Medicine has made tremendous strides in the past decade or so. Sure cost a lot. This is very true.
that didn't go on tape too loudly.
That's another story. It's sort of like TV advertising. It's gone up plenty, and so has radio advertising.
I was glad the way he started off.
No, the strides have been tremendous, seriously speaking. Most of it has been in the field of organ transplant, I would say. Behind the scenes, there's a lot of work going on.
Just a minute. Are you fooling with your switch? Did you turn your switch off? There you go.
I did. Maybe we better start all over. Back
Okay.
in. Leave it blank?
Just leave it blank.
Well, that just shows you I'm not much of a microphone operator.
It's revealing. It shows how the engineers around KFRA work. I mean, that's the way they carry on all day.
I wondered what happened to the station when I couldn't hear anything today.
Switch off.
I was working on an amplifier at home, and I was using the station, for my signal, and all of a sudden I don't hear anything. I said, "My God, what's going on?" I start disconnecting wires and hooking them up. Come to find out, the station wasn't on, but they came back on.
Yeah.
Now,
Doc
to get back
not much
to
of a microphone thing, but Doc is also a ham operator.
Oh well.
What is your?
Let's not go into that.
What is your call?
W5IQH. The I stands for I, and Q for quack, and H for ham.
I quack ham.
So I'm a quack ham.
Going back to our original discussion about medical progress.
The progress has been mostly in the field of organ transplant. This is the most dramatic progress that's been made in the past decade or so. Successful transplants of kidneys. Probably the most successful have been kidneys, but bone and so on have been transplanted, and I think the most dramatic in the past few years has been heart transplants. Behind the scenes and away from the glare of the spotlight, though, some tremendous accomplishments have been made in the field of cellular study, mutations, changes that go on within the cell. And the importance of this, of course, is that it is closely related, we believe, to the development of abnormal growth, which would be malignant growth or cancer, which is our big challenge now, is to be able to control cancer. And much of this accomplishment has been done through the use of computers, strange as it may seem to you. A lot of the computations and concerning genes and chromosomes, etc., within the cell mechanism have to be worked out, and these are long spiral chains, ribosomes, and they match in pairs, and I won't get into all the details. It's quite complex, but the progress is being made. We have been able to create, so to speak, mutants, changes by the use of these techniques, and it looks like the long sought for development of life, we'll say, from inorganic substances is just beyond the horizon. I'm not saying it's going to be a complex form as we know humans and animals and plants to be, but it may be some rudimentary form. In the field of treatment of sicknesses, many diseases have been controlled with the proper inoculation, public health methods, and so forth. Today, the big theme is anti-pollution of the air and waters and so forth, which are public health problems. The trend towards mass delivery of medical care is just beyond the horizon. This seems to be the thing that'll be prominent in the next decade or two. How are we going to deliver the care, medical care, to the sick? It is apparent that we just don't have enough trained physicians to provide the care that's needed. We probably have to go into some modification in which paramedical people, people who are trained in medical techniques but are not physicians, so to speak, are going to do much of the detail work that physicians are now required to do. And in this manner, they'll be able to provide more care for more people. It's questionable whether anytime soon we can get enough schools, get enough young men and women interested in going into the medical profession to begin to provide the needs for physicians. So the trend is now towards this method of providing care. The drugs and use of drugs for treatment of disease is another field in which chemistry and physics have played a big role. Physics has come to the forefront in the many phases of treatment in particular, but also diagnosis in the use of electronic equipments where rapid tests can be made. For instance, today we can take a sample of blood from a patient and within just a few minutes have complex biochemical analyses on 12 or 15 components of the bloodstream, which will give us help us to make a diagnosis of serious conditions involving some of the vital organs, and we can get this more or less momentarily. Electrocardiography, encephalograms, these are all electronic devices in the physical field I was speaking of that help us to come up with diagnosis which will permit us to treat our patients more intelligently. The trend has been towards hospitalization of patients because this is the center where all of these exotic diagnostic methods and therapeutic methods are available. It becomes prohibitive for private individuals or groups of individuals to be able to finance these needs. Most of our hospitals, as a result, are going to become or are already, let's say, public hospitals, or certainly public subsidized hospitals, your parish hospitals, city hospitals, state hospitals, and so forth. The care of the chronically ill has become quite an acute problem in recent years and is probably going to become worse because we're getting more and more elderly people. The population towards the percentage of older people in the population is increasing. They're, for practical purposes, not very productive, and they are more consumers of attention than they are producers of services. And they become quite a drain on the public generally. I skipped over a lot of these things very lightly. I'm sure there may be some specific facet of the total problem which you may want to question me on, and I'll be happy to give you the benefit of what information I do have on the subject.
One thing that may be interesting to the people in the future is to find out what diseases, for example, have come under control in our generation. For example, polio is one that's been coming under control. This
is very true. The infectious diseases, for the most part, to just use a large group, and particularly those infectious diseases for which we are able or have been able to develop a vaccine. In other words, those diseases in which we can give the disease to a patient or to an individual in an attenuated, a weak form, but let them build up their own resistance to the specific proteins of this organism. Then when they're exposed to the germ, they're able to fight it off on their own. This is what we call active immunity. And as a group of diseases, I would say that this group is the principal one that we have been able to accomplish what I mentioned. Another group is a group which is vector transmitted. Here I'm referring primarily to insect vectors or some other animal vector. Certain parasitic diseases, let's take malaria. I can remember when I was studying medicine in the early years of my medical career, malaria was quite frequently encountered. And I would be misrepresenting things grossly if I would tell you that I haven't seen a single case of malaria in the local population in 20 years. It's just non-existent. And this is because of mosquito control, because of public health methods of improving the situation where the mosquitoes can no longer breed. We don't have stagnant waters and so forth, which permit the breeding of the type of mosquito that can transmit the disease. But over and above that, not having any patients with malaria, the mosquitoes can't bite anybody who has a disease to bring it to someone else. These people, for the most part, live in screen homes and are protected from the mosquitoes. And so on and so on. I could go into many of them, but basically, where an animal vector is involved, I would say that public health measures have brought about the success in controlling them. Certain other diseases that have been a scourge to mankind, tuberculosis, for instance, is, for practical purposes, well controlled. We still run into an occasional case, but they're diagnosed much earlier. They're no longer able to infect the whole household and the whole neighborhood, and as a result, the incidence is considerably less. And, well, I could go on and name many of them. And as a result, today, most of our people are dying from the scourge of the age, which is the automobile. You'd be surprised. Most people are dying from accidental deaths or from injuries sustained in accidents. And of course, the heart and circulatory diseases, which are more or less common to older people because part of the aging process involves hardening of the arteries and certain deteriorative changes within the vessels themselves. And of course, malignancies, cancer. These malignancies, of course, we see more of them because people who used to die from pneumonia and typhoid fever and so on in the past are now living longer, and they are able to develop these malignant diseases because their genes were probably carrying the tendency towards it, well, from birth.
Also, the diagnostic procedures nowadays are able to diagnose cancer where perhaps in other times, I know I heard my mother today refer to what they said in the French, le mauvais mal, or the big hurt. That's all they knew what to call it. You know, and now diagnosis probably would ascertain that individual had a tumor or a cancer.
This is true. Many cases we thought were a certain disease with improved diagnostic techniques have proven to be something else. A classic example, well, you can remember back in the biblical days, they referred to lepers and so forth, and this was a scourge and how fatal the disease was. Well, leprosy is no longer this type of malignant condition, and although we do have special hospitals for treating these patients, they live reasonably normal lives under treatment. Many of them are even cured. But many of the conditions that were called leprosy in the past were malignancies. These indolent ulcers and so forth that are described way back in the days we were referring to were just misdiagnosed. They were probably malignancies or tuberculosis or some other disease that just had an indolent ulcer, or it showed some disfiguring process on the limbs or on the body or face, and they were just automatically classified as lepers. They weren't, of course.
I want to get into what you see ahead for the future, Doc, but before we get off into another tangent, put you on the spot as we have others. Tell us a little bit about your personal history.
Well, I could use the old adage, I was born, I suffered, and I died, but in between that is what you're looking for. I'm a country boy, just like all of us here, I guess. I was born and raised in a little city called Wallace. That's spelled W-A-L-L-A-C-E. It's probably not even on the map. It's on the west bank of the Mississippi River in the parish of St. John the Baptist. Finished high school at Edgard and went to Tulane. I got my bachelor's degree there and, of course, my medical degree in 1940. Interned in the hospital in New Orleans and took my residency training in Lafayette.
Who was the founder of that town, George?
No, I think he was named after the town.
George Wallace.
In Lafayette, I was there a resident for several years and went to practice in Morgan City. Stayed there for 2 or 3 years and then went back to Lafayette as the chief surgeon and director of the hospital. And in 1949, I moved to Franklin. I've been here ever since. I came here with the late Dr. Guy Aycock, who was sheriff of the parish at that time, and had a small hospital which went by the name of the Aycock Clinic. This was the only hospital in the area. It only had about 10 beds, frame building, and it by today's standards, it was far substandard. By the standards of that day, it was reasonably good. From this, the Franklin Foundation Hospital developed, and another private hospital here in town, which is no longer functioning since the parish hospital has undergone an expansion program. It's now 100 beds and ultra modern. It's equipped to up to the last minute, so to speak. Everything that one can expect in a community hospital away from a major city, we have it here. We're well equipped, we're well staffed, and except for a need for a few more physicians, I think we're in real good shape.
Your father was also a physician, wasn't he?
Yes, this is true. My daddy finished from Tulane in 1913, and my second son finished there also. So there are 3 generations of doctors that finished from Tulane, which is some sort of a record. There are many families that have 3 generations of physicians, but we were the first at the time that 3 generations finished from the same university.
We'll ask Doc to stick around for our general bull session in a few minutes to just talk generally about today. The reason why we want to get into what I keep referring to as a bull session is this, is many aspects of today's life, especially in the news, what is making the news, what we feel the major events that are shaping history. In the year 2020, you'll be able to look at a history book or take a look at the old archives of newspapers or listen to radio and television broadcasts and get some of the facts surrounding it. But what I feel the most interesting part of history is always how does it affect the people who live at that particular time. So that's why I thought it would be most interesting for us to discuss how it seems to be affecting our own age. And
I might mention, John, at this time that another man who is walking about our studios at the time we're making the recording is one Ralph Williams. Ralph is on the KFRA staff. He's one of our staff engineers, and I asked him before we started our tape if he had any comments he wished to make or if he had any advice that he'd like to pass on to the people of the year 2020, and he said no, he didn't have any comments to make, and then after thinking a little bit, he says, yeah, tell them to get drunk. So I don't know if he wants...
I wonder what they'll be using to get drunk then.
I don't know if he wants equal time or not. If he does, there's a microphone there.
Doc Fernandez a moment ago said, I, like you, am a country boy, and I just wonder, in 50 years from now, what the term country boy will mean.
I observe that we are all country boys. Raymond was born in the country in the Four Corners community. You and I in Dural, Florence near Franklin, and the doctor from Wallace. Where was Billy Shin born and reared?
In the Franklin area. No, Baldwin.
In Baldwin. And Ralph was born where? Say something, at least high.
I was born in LSC, which is about 5 miles out of Franklin. Yeah, pure country, natural born sugarcane country. And later on moved to Franklin at the age of about 8 years of age or somewhere in that area.
Were your parents with you?
And yeah, parents, yeah.
Ralph is the baby of the staff of the panel here tonight. Being a very young, what, Ralph?
25.
25 years of age, and that means that in the year 2020 he will be 75 years old. Well, Grandpa Ralph, how are you getting on? We're going to be saying that.
Somebody will be saying that.
Florence, I mentioned that Louisiana, very proudly mentioned that Franklin was Louisiana's only 4 times cleanest city. As the head for a number of years now, for several years at least, of the Franklin Chamber of Commerce, manager as we identified you earlier, what does this mean to you? And what do you think it means to the citizenry of Franklin to have this singular honor?
Oh, it's quite an honor, and we are all very proud of it. It's something that the entire community had to work to acquire. And because of this, everyone continues to refer to it. I might point out that this was in a category of 10,000 population, just under 10,000 rather. Within the state, each city competes with other cities of its own size. And now that we've won it 3 times in succession, we retain the title permanently.
Speaking of that, I don't think anyone has mentioned what the population of Franklin is.
Right. Go ahead.
Well, we're estimating about 11,000. The U.S. Census is in the process of being taken, but we haven't gotten the figures yet, so we're estimating about 11,000.
Might mention that the city of Jennings is another city in the state. I think Franklin and Jennings, as far as I know, are the only 2 who have ever won a trophy in this statewide contest on 3 consecutive years. And you have to win 3 consecutive years in order to keep this big trophy, which is circulated about the state among the winners. But where we came out ahead of Jennings is that in Florence, the years were 1958 and then 1962, 3, and 4.
No, wasn't it 64, 65, and 66?
64, 5, and 6, whatever it be. Where we came out ahead of Jennings is that we won 1 year and then didn't participate for a year or 2, and then participated and lost, and then came back and won 3 years in a row, whereas Jennings were eliminated after 3 years of competition. So that leaves Franklin the only city in Louisiana, up to now at least, that has been a 4 times winner.
I think we should not, we shouldn't fail to mention the fact that this contest is sponsored by the Louisiana Federation of Garden Clubs, and that within Franklin it was spearheaded by the Franklin Garden Club.
Glad you mentioned that. And the contest, of course, has been going on for about 15 years, as I remember.
We're going to let everybody take a slight break here because we want to get into another segment of our programming for just a few minutes and come into entertainment, because radio today, as it stands, has undergone some massive changes of the radio in this last 50 years. Incidentally, this is the 50th anniversary of broadcasting, 1970 is. And we've come a long way, because early radio was...
the first program on KBZE.
What is that,
There's
Doc?
the mic over there.
What was that?
I believe I heard the first programs on, where was it, Pittsburgh, KDKH.
Many.
Where were you then?
Twirling little bitty knobs, man, that was quite a this was quite an accomplishment. I can remember my daddy built a set. It was a monstrous looking thing, but it certainly impressed me. And there were, it looked like innumerable dials, but there probably were 3 major dials. I don't recall just what their functions were, but you had to tune all 3 of these together. You'd pick up one and then you'd come back with the other. I guess it was
the right hue.
Tuned RF type thing. It was before the super heterodines. And if we could just pick up one station, well, this was an accomplishment. And I can remember, too, the fights, the big boxing championship fights when Tooney and Dempsey fought. It looks to me like everybody within 25 miles would come to our house to listen to the fight on the radio. This was a big event. It was quite an accomplishment.
It's like when Dudley LeBlanc would come in a few years ago, and we lived in Dural. We had one of the few radio sets in the community way before TV, and everybody from miles around would come to our house to hear Senator Dudley J. LeBlanc in French. And my heaven, I wish we had tape recordings of these programs. Incidentally, of course, you mentioned 50th anniversary of broadcasting. Well, when this will be played back, as we think it will, at that time, it'll be the 100th anniversary of broadcasting. So, Doc, you mentioned your father, so you're not only a ham, but you're a son of a ham as well.
Yeah, that's very true. Very
I did not
true.
realize that.
This is true. Of course, ham radio is just one of my hobbies. I have many of them.
Radio has undergone some tremendous changes. As Doc said early in those days, it was a multitude of programming. Actually, it wasn't programming so much as a mishmash of different things that they would put on the radio. Matter of fact, it was quite some time before any type of program was published so that people would know what was coming on next. It was just catch as catch can, more or less. And then eventually they started getting into more concrete programming. I think I just broke one of our unbreakable records here. But recordings. But then radio got into its almost this golden era when the big bands were on in the 30s and such, 20s, 30s, and 40s. This was radio's golden years before the advent of television. After World War II, television made its appearance. During that time, FM radio made a brief appearance and slowly sank beneath the waves right after World War II. But television was a new child of the age, and everyone predicted the demise of radio. Radio had to make some tremendous changes. And to where radio as we know it today in 1970 is very much strictly an entertainment medium. Most of our hours of programming is strictly entertainment, mostly music. KFRA being in a small town and having to have a diversity of programming, has a multitude of talk shows and different programs that try to fulfill all the needs of the community.
And trying to be everything to everybody.
Right. And as a result, doing very little to keep everybody happy. But in your major... What?
If you think you got a headache, try being the mayor.
But in the major markets, New Orleans, where there's several radio stations, one station usually specializes in one particular type of music, perhaps nothing but country and western music. Another one may specialize in what we call rock and roll music today. Another one in perhaps the classicals. Another one in good music, easy listening type music. So radio today is very much an entertainment vehicle. So I thought it would be interesting when I tape recording to kind of take a look at music as we know it today and perhaps pick up some of its roots. Music is undergoing some fast and diverse changes today. It's pretty difficult for the public to keep up. Most of the records are bought by anywhere from 11 to 13-year-old kids, and it pretty much reflects this. The older kids go, of course, buy mostly albums, more expensive, or tape recordings of their popular artists. But in the music business today, what an artist can or a group can make a hit recording today and next month be in oblivion. This is exaggerating a little bit, but it has been done, believe me. Many groups come out and make one-hit recording, and then that's about the last you hear of them. One of the major influences in music today came about with a blending of then country music and what was referred to as rhythm and blues or race records, which was mostly Negro artists. And in deference to Raymond, then we called them Negro artists, now we call them black artists. But there was one young man in Memphis, Tennessee who recorded. He was recorded for the Sun record label, Sam Phillips there. Recorded a couple of records that didn't do too well, and then Sam Phillips sold the rights to this young man to RCA Victor, along with a couple of master recordings that he had made. And this one recording hit like a bomb, and that was, if I'm trying to remember, in 1954, when this recording became very, very popular by a young man named Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley in Heartbreak Hotel. Just made the comment. He said if he doesn't do something soon, his wife is going to come looking for him, and she'll call and say, "Where are you?" So I'm listening to Elvis Presley. And I go over like a bomb. But
this thing by Elvis
Presley.
This Elvis Presley record came on, as John said a while ago, shattered many things, and one of the things it did that really threw a curve at we in broadcast was to put us in a position where we didn't know how to classify anything anymore. I remember my record library in Ville Platte, we couldn't make any more sense of the records that were coming in. How do we classify these things? And it stilled me.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a look at music a little bit more in depth in a few minutes. Certain areas we would like to discuss now, and one in particular that we want to bring up at this point with our guest, Mr. Raymond Lockett, and that is something that is perhaps changing our society more than anything in this decade, and that is race relations. And I think Chris had a few comments he wanted to make along that line.
I think it's a very proper thing for us to go into. I think it surely will be interesting to the people of 50 years hence. The matter of race relations, of course, through the American history, has been one of the very crucial matters on the minds of the people. In recent years, the revolution, as I believe most everybody would be ready to term it, that has been coming about in a change in the way that people of different races look at each other and the way they're trying to learn more about one another has been not only intensely interesting, but intensely important in all kinds of ways. Of course, the great issues today are pollution of the air, pollution of the water, pollution of the sound waves, and that is very topical. It has not been that way for very many years, but the question of race relations, of course, going back from before slavery in American history has been very, very important. And I would like to ask the members of the panel tonight to be, of course, as candid as we can, because we're trying to record something for the sake of history here, and to make observations about where we are today in the matter of race relations, and what progress or what changes have we seen that we can point that have taken place in the last year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 that we feel is significant, important, and relevant today. Let's start off with the black member of our panel, Raymond Lockett. Raymond, what do you see? Where do we stand at this juncture in history? Have we made progress? Have we made as much progress as we could or should have?
Well, Chris, this is a hard question, and still it's not a very hard question to answer. When we speak of progress, I guess we have to measure it along some line. Looking at progress as far as race relation, I could see a little progress has been made in my short stay on this earth. I could see some doors that have been opened, but then this thing of race relation is quite misleading. And here again, it's probably the area you live in or the area you're in at this particular time. And if I could just confine it to the area that we live in, let's say the town of Franklin, to look at Franklin from a distance, race relation would seem to be very good. And this is quite misleading, because although many of the doors that I mentioned before have been opened, Franklin is one, to me, is one of the town with the greatest racist attitude within the 50-mile area. You are accepted or you are tolerated in some area, but then when you touch to the thing that really affect a person, whether a person can really be an individual, whether a person can really be recognized as a man with all the dignity of a man, Franklin seemed to have lost all this sense of morality and all this sense of well-being of one man towards another. And looking at it from a standpoint of one living in Franklin, you can really explore and you can really see the thing of this misguided term of race relation in Franklin. From the, as I said, on the surface it looked good. You dig down a little deeper and you find that what's on the surface is not really there. This was pointed out last year in August and September when we talked about this term of integrating the school, bringing it together. Then you saw exactly how the people of Franklin really felt. And you saw this racism really sticking its head out. And you saw people who at one time you felt recognized a man for a man and not because of the color of skin. You saw them really backing into the shell, and you could see the real racial attitude of these people toward another human being. And this, in our time, in the city of Franklin, is how I see race relation today.
Florence Blackburn and I have discussed the race situation on many occasions, or at least on several occasions, and we were some time back trying to observe, well, what are some of the things that we see in Franklin today that we did not see a year or 5 years ago, and she was pointing out something to me some time back that was rather interesting in enumerating some of these. Florence, what do you see? Not to get into any argument, of course Raymond wasn't as specific as I think you're going to be. What are some of the things that are happening today between the races here, mainly talking about the whites and the Negroid, that you didn't see 10 years, 5 years, 2 years ago?
Well, I believe most of the things, most of the changes, as he said, in connection with your schools. Some of your most vociferous people have, of course, objected to the integration of the schools. I tend to question whether these people represent the majority of the attitudes of the white people in relation to the black people. I feel that we have made some progress. You do find that sometimes when you try to force people to do a thing, they tend to back away from it. But I feel that we're going through a period of change, and we're bound to get into some battles, some disagreements. But I have faith in the fact that eventually these situations will be righted, and that the black people will be given those things that they deserve and more opportunity.
Doc, you have some observations you'd like to make? What changes have we undergone? What are some of the things that Negroes, for example, can do today that they could not do up until very recently? You're mayor of the town. I'm sure that you have your fingers on some real salient changes that have come about.
John, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Chris. I missed the first part of your discussion and your question, so I may be.
I'm going to lead you off here. I think it'd be more proper, perhaps, for one of us to point this out. For example, you, in your administration, if I have these ducks lined up properly, have 7 departments here in the city, and within the last couple of years, I think, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, 2 of your department heads have become black, and to my knowledge this had not have become black, I said, rather have been given to people of the Negroid race, and this I feel pretty sure had not been the case since the days of Reconstruction, am I correct? This is a change that
yes, this is very true.
Recently.
It's been the policy of my administration anyway, and I feel this is more or less the policy of most of the forward-thinking people in the community, that we must give an opportunity to the blacks who show ability and can take a responsibility to give it to them. I think they earn it, and it's a challenge, and those that can respond to the challenge certainly are going to move forward. The black community needs leadership, and it's only by finding the people who can assume this responsibility and carry out these duties are we going to help them to make progress.
Perhaps without attempting to go into a justification for the rightness or the wrongness of one thing, not to head you in a different direction, Doc, but I was interested in telling the people of 50 years hence what some of the changes are that took place. I pointed out 2 here in about a year's time, 2 things that happened in the matter of city government that had not been known here since Reconstruction. I might observe some of the things I had in mind. The fact that the theaters, the movie theaters in our community were desegregated with no difficulty, with no demonstrations, and quite peaceably 2 or 3 years ago, wasn't it, Raymond?
It was.
To my knowledge, they are both desegregated to the point now where Negroes and Caucasians sit downstairs or upstairs in the theaters, all mixed. The restaurants in our community, we have 3 major restaurants, the Shine and Betts, which up to recently was the Hub, and the Forest and the Bilmar, and up, 3 or 4 years ago, the first Negroes were allowed to be served in any part of the restaurant, just like in any other member of the public. I think these changes are yet most of these are yet to come about in some parts of our state, even some of our neighboring municipalities, I dare think. What are some of the other things like this? That
well, Chris, let me add a few to that. Excuse me. I'd like to point out that the recreation departments of the city, as well as private recreation, for instance, the bowling alley has been open, and we didn't have to have any demonstrations. We didn't have to have any litigation to get these open. The same thing can be said about the hospital. Some of the business establishments in town have employed black personnel at other than strictly janitorial duties. They are salespeople, etc. And this came about after sort of a boycott that the black community conducted a couple of years ago, and it was a peaceable and peaceful transition. And I think these things are showing progress. We were able to accomplish these things without breaking showcase windows and getting people wounded or even killed in the process. I think this speaks well for both groups of people, the whites and the blacks. I think there is more of a mutual understanding than we realize. I believe there's a little bit more of an understanding than my friend Mr. Lockett here has presented. I would like to point out, Raymond, that the veneer of civilization is very, very thin, and perhaps the veneer of racial differences is even thinner than that. So looking at things from the standpoint of history of the known history of the world, I think we've made tremendous progress in just a short span of a few years, and I think the big challenge is going to be to keep it that way. I, for one, feel that this is going to be permanent and that there's going to be continued improvement in it as long as people of goodwill want to try to move forward.
I have, Raymond wants to make a comment. It is, as you hear us talking today, one thought couldn't help but cross my mind as to today's present society. In a way, it's a sort of an indictment on our society that Negro opportunity and progress is so unusual that it becomes a whole topic of conversation. But I noticed Raymond, during our discussion, was smiling, I don't think out of amusement particularly, but perhaps out of disagreement. You want to make a comment on that?
Yes, I would like to make a couple of comments. Number one, I think in my opening statement I pointed out that there were a few doors that were open. And I think some docs say we could sit back and we could sort of look at this with pride. But I wonder if Doc would exchange place with me and would look at these few doors that have been opened and wonder if how would it be, you know. We're living in the United States of America where back in the 1700s we had the Declaration of Independence that I think started off with the fact that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable right. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if we just follow these words of our founding fathers, I don't think we would really be looking at any doors that are still closed and any attitudes that people still have toward fellow Americans. And when we see a few token doors open, say this is great progress. I think the thing that if we live up to our documents, then those doors should not have been closed in the first place just because the color of a man's skin. You know, I cannot take great pride in saying, okay, these things have changed, so I can go into any restaurant in Franklin. Some of them with some hostile attitudes, but most of them, they're open. We can look at a few people working in the stores, and we have to do a little boycotting to get this. But why couldn't it be in America, in Franklin, since Franklin's a part of America, that if you are qualified for a job, no matter what color of your skin, that these jobs would be open, these opportunities would be open, you would be treated as a man without saying he's a black man, and then we'll have a little tokenism here. And eventually, I think, when you in the other seat looking on, you could say eventually it's going to come. But when you're the person being oppressed, if this is a fair word to use, then you wonder about this eventual. You don't want to take another 100 years. You want to be treated as a man. You want to have the doors open for you if you're qualified, and the doors to get qualified open to you now.
I like to draw a line in my mind, straight up and down, and like to say, well, this line represents the ideal in human beings learning to understand and live with each other and grant to every other individual an equal opportunity. And when everybody is able to go up and down that line, we have the ideal. And I certainly believe that this, if you could redo everybody's character and thinking and morals, we would achieve this. Then I like to draw a line horizontally, and I like to think that we cannot, sadly I think, but realistically speaking, we can't make that line in which I draw horizontally go up all of a sudden as far as relations between white and black are concerned. But I like to say that in the trying to get the two races to a mutual understanding to where the Negro has 100% equal opportunity and 100% respect, I like to say that that line has gradually gone up, and in the last few years it has taken a sort of a sharper curve. I'm drawing it on the card for Raymond, and while I lament that it can't be done all of a sudden, I think that there has been very promising progress in the very last few years, and to me it seems as if this curve can be continued. We can continually bend this that in a very short time we will have achieved something that will be very much better opportunity-wise and respect-wise for the members of the Negroid race. I say, well, when I was trying to compare all of this, I said, we think of this situation in terms of what the rest of the people in the state are doing, what the rest of the people in the nation are doing. And I think in our little community of Franklin, while we have not, in my mind, achieved nearly the ideal, I think we, comparatively speaking, have been quite a bit better off. I believe this is what the mayor had in mind. And bending this line like we have bent it, or like it has been bent in the last few years, I think it shows a lot of encouragement for the Negro, I should hope, and to me, being sympathetic to their dispossessed situation as I am. Anybody else? John, you want to make some comments?
I just want to make a comment. Number one, I think it's very apparent to our listeners 50 years from now to realize that this is quite a subject that is emotional as well as it is broad, and I think it's rather apparent that the whites feel that a lot has been done and the blacks feel that more should be done now, or not enough has been done. We'd like to go into another area here. I'd kind of like to ask our panel briefly what they see 50 years from now. And this is the humorous part of our program, I think. What do you all see 50 years from now?
What will the world be like? What will Franklin be like? What will communications be like? The Chamber of Commerce, what will it be its objectives?
So let's take a look at Franklin and perhaps even in a broader sense the world in 50 years from now. And what do you think the world is going to be like? Doc?
I don't know if I can speak very well for the world. I don't know whether I can speak except wishfully what I hope it might be. From a practical standpoint, politically, sociologically, for our state and our country, I don't think we will see our present form of government. I think we will see a socialistic state, for better or worse. As far as opportunities for individuals, I think those that are capable and industrious and motivated, there will always be opportunities. For those who are less endowed, it will become more difficult. The standards of living, it would be difficult to say by today's standards. I would think they would be higher, but they won't be as high as they might be in the panacea that we would all hope for. From a medical standpoint, again, I see a government-subsidized form of medicine, of medical care. In the public health field, the same thing. I cannot see how we can continue for another 50 years with the present system. I can see signs of, I don't know whether to use the term degradation or improvement. It all depends on one's point of view. These changes are in the making, however, and I would still like to be here 50 years from now just to see what we have, but it should be quite interesting.
I'd like to, before we continue with this, one area that I wanted to cover particularly, and we haven't yet, and let's take a look at some of the major aspects, major events that have shaped our history today as we know it in 1970. For example, perhaps it'll be a little unusual, hard for people in the year 2020 to realize, but that everyone here fully remembers the advent of the atomic age. And that's World War II, which is what, 20, has it been 20 years? 20-something years, 25 years. And I think I'm the youngest one on the panel, and I remember when the atomic bomb was dropped. How old are you, Raymond?
34.
I'm the youngest one on the panel, 33. Remember the atomic age, and perhaps someone here remembers that dawning of a new era, and perhaps short focus in response to their lives. And one thing I remember very much about the atomic age was after World War II ended, which the atomic age, or the atomic bomb ended World War II, was the dire predictions of doom and disaster for the human race. They didn't think we'd last up to the year 1970. I remember reading before the first hydrogen bomb was exploded that scientists were saying that if a couple of hydrogen bombs were exploded, the concussion would knock the Earth out of its orbit, and we'd die a fiery death in the sun. Of course, they predicted this did knock us about an inch out of orbit. It would take a couple of thousand years for us to end up in the sun. Of course, this hasn't come to pass, but it's always interesting to note that every new technology that is born, it seems like people, the scientists, even those who should know, are quick to predict that this is going to spell the end of the human race.
Florence, what do you think, or Raymond, about 50 years from now? What will the community be like? Either one.
I'll yield to the lady.
Florence?
I don't have any predictions of what it would be like. I don't think I'm that good a guesser. I have a curiosity of what it'd be like, and I don't think any of us has mentioned the trips to the moon, have we? That
No,
we've
I
made
thought
two.
about it a moment ago when John said we had witnessed the entry of the atomic age. Well, of course, we just returned from a trip to the moon very recently.
We made two successful trips to the moon and one round trip without landing, and I am terribly curious to know what it will be like in 2020 if a trip to the moon would be an ordinary thing.
If people will really be experiencing their honeymoons on the moon, huh?
Would you like to go to the moon, Florence?
Oh, yes. I don't know whether I'd hold up under the trip.
It was very recent that we became very anxious about some of our boys maybe going into orbit forever and going into all kind of space difficulties. But they made it back, fortunately, with a disabled ship.
Let me ask this to the panel. Chris, several years ago, let's just go back 20 years. Did you think you were going to see a manned landing on the moon?
Oh, no, I didn't. People, of course, since I was a kid, jokingly would say, oh, he's planning, they'd talk about smart alecks of the community. Oh, he's probably going to figure on trying to make a trip to the moon. This was it was a joke, no matter how you said it. And no, I could not believe, even 10 years ago, that lunatic.
Which is quite old.
Yeah. No, I could not believe that this would be in my lifetime, really.
Raymond, did you think we would make it in your lifetime?
No, I really didn't. I thought of people when they spoke of going on the moon as dreaming.
Well, some dreams came true. I asked Billy Shin, as I said earlier in the program, to take a look at 50 years from now and what did he expect or predict, and he had some interesting observations. So here's Billy Shin's reply to my question about what does he foresee 50 years from now.
Well, to see the future, I have to just look a little bit back at the past, and really it's very awesome when we think of the changes that in such a short time we of this time have lived through. First, we see a civilization that calls itself Christian, but which is engaged in such bloody wars in each generation that it is heart-rending to see parents have to send their sons off to die in foreign wars each 25 years of our lifetime. We have a technology that has put men on the moon in a very short time of a crash program of space exploration which costs stupendous sums, but the same technology cannot even clean our environment to keep us from dying here on the earth. We see men that had vision and dedication. They were able to conquer disease and even eliminate polio, but we still shoot down a president in the street, and we run riot and burn down cities and colleges. It's the lesson of history, however, that all of our things go in cycles, and that each time we have a period of action, inevitably comes a time of the reaction, and the pendulum will swing from one side to the other. Unfortunately, however, it won't obey the law of Galileo that it'll only go as far on one side as it went on the other, and sometimes the reaction is more terrible than the action. Now, at present, as you know, and we all know, we are in terrible, troublesome times. We have been burdened with mental problems, social problems, and problems which are enough to cause us to wonder if there is going to be any future for any one of us. This will probably give a great laugh to those who ever hear this, because this actually has been through the ages, the lament of each generation, that each thing is dying out and there'll never be any future. So therefore, this is really just my own personal views of what I can see into the future from the past. I think it's really fortunate none of us can see into the future. As I see it, there are only one or two ways from which we really can go from here. We either will have a reaction, and since we've had such a period of license and abandonment, it would naturally react completely to the other side. And by doing so, all I can see in that direction is a severe limitation of our living patterns, our morals, and our freedom. In those times, the strong will tend to subordinate the weak, and the will of the majority will be forced on the minority. For better or for worse, I don't know. But it will all be told to everyone that it's for the betterment of everybody. In the name of law and order, of course, many a person will fall, probably many of them innocent. I'm not arguing the good or the bad. I'm only trying to foresee what I think may happen. Now, the only other direction would be that we'll just continue our decline that we've had. And the sad, sad thing to me of the present era is to see how much everything has deteriorated from our moral standards, not merely from moral in the sense of religion values, but moral from the standpoint of people just living as people, with as human beings with a conscience and a soul. And all of us have tended a great deal, little by little, to let so many things erode these virtues that have been embedded and struggled for so long in our past history. If this continues in our way, all we can see is that the young people, who, after all, are the only ones that are the hope of our future, will be abandoning themselves in drugs and crime and moral turpitude, and they are really, even though it may sound trite, the only ones that have control of the future. We can't do anything about it. We've had our say. Whether we've won or lost, it's over now, and it passes on to them. And if they can achieve the goal of rising above the things that exist now and bring about a change for the better, then everything will work out for the best. I believe really that there's a pattern to history, and that whether we think it or not, that the world for thousands of years is heading to some goal. I don't know what the goal is, and sometimes we slip a great deal and we go back into a period of decline, but somehow or another we find a way to get out of it, and it goes on. And someday we may know the whole story of what the pattern is all about. But there's a way I try to look at it, that I don't think really sometimes that men make history. I think history makes men.
Earlier in the program, when you were talking about some of the changes from the past to the present, you spoke about the change in which government has taken a bigger role in society. What do you think the role of government will be 50 years from now?
I think if it continues the trend, which it has been on for over 30 years, we will see a completely socialistic system in which all the individual initiative has been taken away or given away by the individual in return for what he would consider security. And we will see complete control of where we work, how we work, what we are paid, how we will live, where we will be treated when we're sick, probably where we will be buried when we die, if they're to bury us at all.
What about the Franklin area? What do you see for Franklin 50 years from now?
Well, looking closer at home at our surroundings, I see we live in a beautiful area and a lovely state. Actually, it could be much lovelier, but it is pretty as it is now. In the past, we've depended a great deal on resources of agriculture, timber, and minerals, and our large supply of water for our economical development. Unfortunately, these are not unlimited. So by looking in the future, all I can wonder is what can we expect if only this kind of development continues? These resources in time will deplete and become exhausted. We'd then be forced probably to return to an agricultural society and perhaps become a class of small tradesmen, unless some unusual industrial development, which at the present time may not be readily foreseeable to anyone at this time, should come about to change completely the manner of economic development of this area. I do hope that somehow in the next several generations we'll have some men of vision and ability who will be able to see possibilities and bring about changes for the better for all the people who are living here at that time. Insofar as myself, personally, I think because of our particular type of geography, one of our great possibilities for the future really lies in the development of our part of the state into a clean, healthy area in which sport, recreation, and travel are encouraged, so that all can see what we have and love.
I was Billy Shin, Mr. William T. Shin, abstractor, and a tape recording I made yesterday because he couldn't be with us tonight for our programming, and what he foresees 50 years from now. Raymond, I think earlier you wanted to make a remark.
Right, John. 50 years from now, I can see a United States and a Franklin that would be a much better place to live in, because I think somewhere down the line between now and 50 years, people will find some means of communication, and that the younger people will try to change many of the things that exist that would tend to tear us apart today. This would happen, or there won't be anyone around 50 years from now to really listen to this tape. The second thing, I see Franklin about the same size it is now, if not smaller, because I think the sugar industry and the farmers will kill any industrial growth in Franklin. Unless someone might say, probably when the old farmers pass away, we might be able to bring in the type of industry that would cause Franklin to grow. Other than that, people will have to leave Franklin for a livelihood.
Well, there is one thing certain, talking about the farmers, all of us will pass away. One thing for certain. We have David Rose came in a moment ago into our studios, and we asked him to tell us what is going to be in this time capsule. This tape recording that we're making now is going to be buried in the time capsule tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning.
Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And Dave has been the one who has more or less agreed and has gone on with the lead in developing the whole project. And we'd like for him to tell us about it, where it'll be buried, and describe the tube for us and what will be in it. Dave, how are you?
Fine, Chris. Kind of stoved up after the concrete all in a while.
While we were doing all this chatting, he was out on the courthouse square up until just a few minutes ago. We understand working on it. What were you doing out there?
Well, yesterday I molded concrete into a square vault, like a tomb would be, with a cylinder in the middle. and this was to keep the water and dirt and other things that would contaminate or corrode the container, which is made out of stainless steel. And it's just a housing for it. It makes it look pretty, and I think if they ever want to move it, in case they always expanding, this thing could very easily be moved in one piece without disturbing anything on the inside.
Lifting out of the ground the whole concrete block, you mean?
Right.
And the metal capsule, as we call it, will be in that concrete block, right?
Right, Chris.
And it's going to be sealed, airtight?
Chris, we'll put probably 3 inches of concrete on top of this after the cylinder has been placed inside, and then the wet cement will be, well, on top of the wet cement will be a 1 3/4 inch marble slab with the inscription of Franklin Sesquicentennial Time Capsule, emplacement May 23rd, 1970, to be opened April 24th, 2020, dedicated to the bicentennial citizens of Franklin. And my quotation was, this is the way it was, and sponsored by the Brothers of the Bush. I think this summarizes, as it was, everything at this time in 1970. It's small words, and it does cover a large area.
For posterity, when they open this and find this tape, who were the Brothers of the Bush?
Chris, I have all the Brothers of the Bush typed up in alphabetical order. There's 303 paid members. And they're all in alphabetical order, and they'll be placed in there with a welcoming message to that effect.
Brothers of the Bush, of course, were a temporary society in Franklin that sprang up here a few months ago and grew long beards, hence the word Bush, and help through this growth to commemorate the feeling of oldness or old age or times gone by in celebration or in recognition of the sesquicentennial, Florence, of Franklin that was celebrated here recently, as we talked about earlier.
David, just briefly, can you tell us what else is going to be in the capsule?
Yeah, John, briefly, kind of didn't know what to put, didn't know what direction to go to ask. You ask everybody, they'll be putting their marbles and their last pennies and things like that. So I first went to the schools, to the principals, and asked them to put the principal, the name of the school, with their staff. And the high schools, I asked to list their seniors, which, the way my calculations are, there will be approximately anywhere from 64 to 67 when this time capsule is open, and quite a few of them might still be around. Their graduation invitations are included. Franklin High School has included the music and band concert programs.
On tape?
No, just the program, the written program is what they played, type of music, the composer, that type of thing. I went then to the school board and the police jury and asked for statistics along with the board members and their duties and things like this. And then the surrounding towns, Baldwin, Berwick, Patterson, and Morgan City, are all supposed to have their elected officials with some data of their community. The Chittimacha tribe in Charenton included a list of their membership as of to date who are living on the reservation. Then I went to, I thought, native people who have, I consider, made good, like Bob Angers. I have a few articles in there written by him, especially the 1958-59 composite of history in his newspaper before he left. And today I was with him and he wrote me a letter explaining it and describing his family and just comments. And then I called Pat Caffrey in Washington. He sent me a letter. His was supposed to be on the prophecy of the future, along with Carl Bow and C.C. Taddy Aycock, all on prophecy. Tom Allen wrote his comment on the sugar industry in this area. Then he narrowed it down to St. Mary Parish and then Sterling Sugars. And then I went into the other types of important information, like KFRA here will put these tapes in. The Banner has the sesquicentennial coverage issues to be put in there. Then we had two distinguished people that wrote books, Tom and Lucy Holmes. One of the cookbook and one of the history of this part of the country I thought would be nice to put in. The last issue of the St. Mary Landmarks Society magazine was in it. Then I put for information the telephone directory signed by all the telephone employees. The city directory, which has the name and the job status and address of all the people in the town of Franklin. All the news clippings from January through the sesquicentennial celebration have been collected and put into a large envelope, and we put that in here. I'm sorry I didn't get to put them in a scrapbook form, but someone will take that apart and do it for me later.
David, when is, and this is going to be buried tomorrow, right?
Right.
At what time?
10 o'clock.
10 o'clock, May 23rd, 1970. We have just a few minutes of tape left and so much to cover. Chris, did we get your predictions for the year 2020 on there?
No, I didn't. I don't have much to predict. I might just make this one little short observation, though. I think that there is a very serious type of addiction that is grabbing a hold of the people today, which I call economic addiction. And I have to describe that by saying that I'm very afraid of the welfare situation. As much as I like for there to be somebody or some agency to help the poor who, for many different reasons, may not have so much as their brothers to each side, to either side of them, I just fear that the welfare system that we have built into our society, into our economy, is going to topple the form of government that we know it today. And this will be the main reason to where we'll have to have some kind of violent revolution. And I think it's very imminent, because the economic type of base support we have for our free enterprise democracy will not be able to withstand the load that's being placed on it. And the goose that has been laying the golden egg to make this capitalistic democracy function to bring this nation so far will just be killed with this parasite, or this cancer, if you will, of economics.
It's interesting that most of our observations tonight about the year 2020 deals with the fact that our government, which is a republic, will become more and more socialistic. This has been the total agreement from our panel as to what our government's going to be like 50 years from now, and I cannot help but concur with a slight modification that I'm going to get to in a moment. I want to take a look at the year 2020 from this standpoint. I'm going to boast a little bit in making my predictions, because everyone said they never thought that in their lifetime they'd see a man on the moon. And I have as a witness a dear friend, almost a brother of mine, Gene Buller in Villeplant. Just about 20 years ago, when we were in high school, we got into a lively argument, as you do in high school. You don't have anything else better to do, I guess, about the future. And he says, I use him as my witness, that I predicted then that a man would be on the moon before the year 1970. And I made it by just a couple of months, that prediction. So I'd like to kind of take a look 50 years from now and see about some predictions. I think, as Billy Shin observed about we're always at war, I think we're going to see more limited warfare in the next 50 years. I foresee a major war. I do not see a all-encompassing Third World War, as some purveyors of doom predict. I do see, however, limited warfare, possibly with Red China, and even the use of atomic weapons during that war. Perhaps even other types of warfare as well, chemical warfare. But I foresee that within the next 50 years. As far as here in America, I foresee more socialism. One of our economic experts recently predicted that within less than 50 years, within 20 years, possibly even beyond that, maybe in another 10 years, the rate has been going lately, that most of our wages, roughly 50 to 60% of our wages will be eaten up in taxes. We're already close to about 30% now, so that isn't too far to go. I do see more socialism, but I also see Today, looking ahead, we'd probably call it a dictatorship. I don't know whether they'll call it in 50 years from now, but I do see the emergence perhaps of a strong leader, perhaps because of this warfare with Red China. Americans are going, our Congress is going to vote some outstanding leader, whoever is president at that time, perhaps some tremendous personal powers that we've never seen before, perhaps to end the war or something. I don't think he's going to let go of these powers very easily, and I think for that thing I kind of look at some form of dictatorship here in this country, or at least a strong centralization of power in some individual, along with the socialism we spoke about. One thing that I can't help but see in the future, in our generation here, matter of fact, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've seen the emergence of the God is dead philosophy. It's been very much misunderstood, but our generation, the young generation coming up, seem to be searching for something that religion can or cannot or supply, remains to be seen. But I see a tremendous divergence in religion 50 years from now. There's going to be a strong religion on the part of some, strong anti-religious forces on the part of others, to where I think we're going to be divided strong religiously, perhaps strong persecution of some religious sects. And if they're persecuted, you can almost say perhaps they are the true religion. I don't know, it seems like those are the ones we usually wind up being persecuted. But I see a strong religious movements in the next 50 years. How it's going to wind up in the year 2020, I don't know. Well, that's what I kind of see 50 years from now. And I also kind of feel I'll be around to take a look at it, because I'll only be 83 then.
With all these predictions, I kind of changed my mind. I believe I'd like to stay around and see who's right and who's wrong in 1970 here around this control board.
We're just about run out of tape. I did promise earlier in the program a lot of discussion concerning the news events today. We didn't get around to it. Promised that we would discuss some other aspects. We didn't get around to it. Originally we thought it would be a 2-hour program. We have just about 3 hours on tape already, and it seems like a lot of areas that we wanted to get into has not been discussed. Or I hope that the year 2020 will forgive us, because there's been a lot of history to cover in the last 3 hours.
And I'm sure that I'm going to every passing day regret more and more that I did not do what I variously mentioned or thought of doing, and that was to tape a whole day of KFRA's broadcasting with all of its odd sounds, all of its interesting faux pas, and possibly all of the informative and entertainment elements we gave our people in any given day. But we just didn't get around to it. Like you say, tonight there were so many things we were going to do. I had even thought I was going to let the people here explore the racial relations a little further and try to determine for the people of 50 years from now whether we had done anything constructive or anything good or anything worthwhile, but we won't have time to go into that. So, John, we'll wind it up now.
Any final comments from our panel?
No comments.
John, I'd like to say I got a dog tag in there. It's labeled, so I hope in 50 years they'll still know what it is.
You want to explain it now?
It's a tag to identify a human being in America who's fighting in foreign wars. In case he has fallen, this is to identify him to his survivors.
Enough. In just a moment, after I break the program off, I'm going to play a few selections of the music that was popular today with appropriate comments along there. I'd just like to say finally to the world in the year 2020 that even though we are a society that is beset today by violence, we have lost a president by violence, we are enmeshed in a war of violence in Southeast Asia. Remember us from this standpoint that we're also the generation that preached peace. For the next few minutes, for the rest of this tape, I did have on hand some of the music that was popular today and appropriate comments. I did play something earlier by Elvis Presley. He was one of the bombshells of music that hit in about 1954. I played his hit recording of Heartbreak Hotel a little earlier, mentioning that he had some of his roots in hillbilly music, or as we call it today, country and western music. There was a lot of other areas that of music that I had, and as I said earlier, we're just flat running out of tape. There is one bombshell, however, that occurred by the mid-60s rather. It was a phenomenon that was unknown at the time. They're still around today in 1970, not as a entity, a whole group as it is, have kind of branched out singly, but back then they really caused a furor. They called themselves the Beatles. Well, that was a phenomenon that hit in the 60s, the Beatles and I Want to Hold Your Hand, and they have flat sold some records over the years. They started a new sound which has developed into what we call today a psychedelic sound, and we'll discuss it more in just a moment. Also, during the year 1970, you've seen the rise of a performer who first hit the scenes back in 1957 approximately with a hit recording of I Walk the Line. We're speaking of Johnny Cash. Johnny Cash, in part of his recording of I Walk the Line about in 1957, if my memory serves me right, when it was a very strong hit. After several hit songs, he went into decline and not to emerge until the latter part of the 60s, when he had several recordings. During that hiatus when he had lost in popularity, as far as recording was concerned, he did make a lot of personal appearances. He had his a fight with dope. He was on pep pills, amphetamines, this type of thing. He said he was taking as many as 100 a day. And then, due to the help of some close friends and his wife, June Carter, he came out of it and started recording again and started making hit after hit. Here was one of them. Due to the fact that of his brush with the law, because of his taking of dope pills and such as that, he had a strong feeling for the men in prison as he recorded this live at Folsom. Cash at Folsom Prison. He also had a best-selling record, a very unusual record, a humorous one about a guy named Sue, who didn't like the name at all. Hit recording of a boy named Sue, and that was Johnny Cash. A guy who's been around for many, many years, dating back into the early 50s, James Brown, and has emerged as sort of a spokesman for the black race today. This is today's music.